So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Steve Barker. I'm one of the directors within Seetec for our Sales and Employer Partnerships division. And today's webinar is based on actually a lot of our employers and a lot of our prospects, a lot of people we talk to at a number of different events actually, and that is to how to enhance your learning and development strategy utilising apprenticeship standards. So as we go through the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. We'll try to answer those as we go along, and if we get time at the end, we'll try and answer some of the questions at the end of the session. So without further ado, let's get started. So yes, so thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today, and hopefully you're able to take a number of different things from today's webinar. We found that a lot of our employers have actually been requesting information about what is an apprenticeship standard, how do I get it started, how do I work with the right training provider, and what's the best way to really get started with all of this. So it's probably worth just covering what we're going to cover today. But one thing's for sure, it's sort of 2 years since the levy was introduced, alongside a number of other apprenticeship reforms. And we've made a significant move from apprenticeship frameworks to apprenticeship standards. And it's worth understanding that actually there is a big difference between the frameworks and the standard. Frameworks being effectively 3 qualifications, maths and English, a theory base and a practical element to them, whereas standards are more linked to job roles. So we're going to go through a little bit of that today, and also go into the professional development. But one thing's worth noting as well, that not all businesses are fully maximising their levy funds at the moment. I mean, many have been relatively successful so far. They've implemented the right sorts of strategies, but there are quite a few that are really struggling to even get started or to fully utilise it. So we'll walk you through what we would call our step-by-step approach to ensure your organisation benefits from the levy funding training. And in this webinar, we'll be covering step 1, which is identifying development needs. Step 2, creating and implementing a solution that's right for your business. And then we'll be looking at step 3, which is really looking at how you measure the impact of apprenticeships and whether it's meeting the business objectives. And then finally, we'll look at a case study with an organisation called Diligenta, who has been through every different scenario and every single stage so far. It's got some really interesting outputs as well. We'll go through that in a little bit later. Bear with us 1 second. So in terms of understanding apprenticeship standards, as I talked a little bit earlier, the new qualifications, the new apprenticeship standards are absolutely occupation focused. They are based on job roles. They are not qualification led. That means that they are not aimed at just completing pieces of work. For the sake of completing those pieces of work, they are absolutely built around job-specific roles and people within your organisations. And the reason we know that is because they've been developed by people like yourselves, people who work within employers. And those employers formed a number of different trailblazers groups. And that's where employers sat down and said, these are the qualifications that we are looking for, and these are the things that we want our people to be trained in. We want them to be skilled in these sorts of areas. And the reason we want them skilled in these sorts of areas is because they will have a business impact on our business. So it's really important that we look at these apprenticeships as a brand new qualification and almost remove any perceptions we have about the previous frameworks and look at standards as really the future. But standards also give us an opportunity to really look at individuals and how we develop those skills, their knowledge, and how we encourage the right sort of behaviours so that as a business, as individuals, we actually see the benefits. And one of the other key important elements of apprenticeship standards is the element of endpoint assessment. And that is an independent organisation other than your training provider that will actually conduct that endpoint assessment. And that endpoint assessment is basically an independent body saying that they have gone through the various elements of the apprenticeship, and on passing that endpoint assessment, that they have independently taken on board the skills, the knowledges, and the behaviours of that apprenticeship. They've applied what they've learned, and it has independently been assessed, and hopefully that individual has passed. So the endpoint assessment is carried out by an independent organisation, and some of the awarding bodies actually are endpoint assessment organisations as well. So it's important to remember that standards cover a really broad range of qualifications, and actually that continues to grow. And we believe in something that we call progressive pathways, which is really giving people a route through qualifications to a specific aim. And we know that there's about 400 standards that have been approved for delivery at the moment. We believe that there are many more to come, another 200 plus still in the development stages at the moment. And there are a variety of levels over the progressive career pathways at all levels. But what we've picked up as we've gone along now is that we're having more conversations with employers about how you actually put in place these progressive pathways with employers right from the very beginning. So you can take somebody from a level 2 and actually show them what that pathway looks like in terms of their own individual career development or development of your own talent, right from retention of existing employees or attraction of new people into your organisation, all the way through to a level 3, maybe leadership, maybe onto a level 4 in project management, and maybe onto a more senior level role as a departmental manager at level 5. And of course, the thing that's different now is that you can now move on to level 6, level 7 and above in apprenticeship degrees. We already know that there are master's degrees and MBAs in apprenticeships as well. So the opportunity to really utilise your levy across a number of different levels and across a number of different sectors and really use the levy to develop your staff has never been more apparent. So in terms of how do you identify your development needs and what is it that you want to achieve? I mean, we believe a good training provider can support you through this and should really take the time to go through this with you as part of their initial discussions. You know, what do you want to achieve? Where are the skills and knowledge gaps? And who would benefit from the training? But it's important to understand what are the ambitions and goals of your organisation right now. Working with a training provider, it's really important that they understand where you want to be, what you're driving towards, what skills gaps are actually in your organisation right now that you're aware of. There may be some skill gaps that you're not aware of. So a full training needs analysis is a really important part of trying to understand where to start and what do you want to achieve. And also, you know, what are your talent attraction strategies? Some employers that we speak to, you know, don't have any particular worries about talent attraction. They're in a good geographical location or they're in a sector where there's good talent. But if you're not in those particular areas, how can you actually build these apprenticeship programs into that talent attraction? And how do you attract the right people that's right for your business? And actually that's key and fundamental to future business growth. But what is the company's growth plans for the next few years, and what talent do you need to attract to sustain that growth? But ultimately, it's really important that any training provider that you work with, or even just yourselves, if you're in learning and development or a HR person, or you're responsible for actually supporting the business with utilising your levy, is understanding your strategic vision and your current direction of travel. And a good training provider will go through all of these things with you, because this is really part of the consultative approach that we certainly take and your training provider should take with you to understand all of this, to support you in this journey. So why even bother spending your apprenticeship levy? Why even bother get started? Well, it's important because we need to understand why would you need to improve your productivity? Is it because you're in a competitive market? Is it because there are additional costs that are making your margins more difficult to achieve? It may well be that you've got a staff or a sector problem where actually productivity is really hard to maintain, or perhaps you have peaks and troughs within your business as well. So how do you train people around those sorts of peaks and troughs, and how do you maintain productivity? The other thing that we come across, particularly in the outsourced sector and the professional services, is improving communication, particularly if you're in a service-led sector business. Some of our organisations who work in insurance or perhaps in the finance sector find that communication is really, really key, particularly if you're selling or you're receiving orders or working with some of your customers. Making sure that you communicate effectively can really have an effect on the bottom line. So again, looking at some of the others, improving standards and working practices. Now, this is a really important one because actually, if you're a large organisation, you might have a number of different sites across the UK. How do you maintain standards across all of those different sites so that all of those sites are achieving the same working practices, working to the same standards and having that level of consistency? And those things are sometimes hard to maintain. And one of the ways around that is to ensure a consistent training program. And we have a number of customers who look at trying to reduce their error rates or perhaps improving staff retention. They may have had a workforce that's been with the business for some time. They're looking for development opportunities, and actually utilising the levy and rewarding or investing or putting them onto some sort of development program is a really strong way of actually retaining some of your staff. But more importantly than that, if you do have some of those staff that you do retain and you do actually have a plan to utilise your levy effectively, what's your succession planning? How do you actually bring in new people to replace the people that you're moving on? What does that look like, and how do you attract the right people to replace the talent you've already got, as well as the CSR and social value agendas as well? So lots of things to consider in terms of why are we doing this. And the next stage within this is to really consider who would benefit from this training. One of the things that we've identified, and we've been working with many employers now for some time, is some employers just want to get started, and that's fine. But actually, it's really important that you start with the right sorts of people. There have been some really good examples where people have wanted to get started. They've invested in the wrong sorts of programs, or perhaps those people didn't quite fully understand the program that they would be studying. And I'm not convinced that they would be getting a full return on investment. So it's really important to understand which sort of departments within your business may have the most impact from studying a program or a development program, what teams or what individuals would best respond to development opportunities or perhaps progression opportunities, or perhaps just need upskilling because they haven't had anything for a while, or maybe there's a number of changes that have taken place in your particular sector from a mandatory statutory training position, or perhaps you're in a sector where it's heavily regulated. So understanding who would benefit from your training is really important. But the other thing to add to this is which individual sites and where to start as well is just as important as well. So there's a lot of things to consider. And one of the approaches that we take is to actually start looking at all of those individuals and homing in on those right people in those right teams and those right departments. So step 2 really is about creating and implementing a solution that really fits and suits your organisation. There is definitely not one size that fits all. Working with the right sort of training provider is really important, and somebody that can actually help you create and implement the solution. That can map perhaps maybe your training priorities to apprenticeship standards, maybe to avoid any duplication, or perhaps even working alongside some of your peers and your sort of subject matter experts to weave in various different aspects of some of the needs that you need into qualification. So the way that Seetec works is that we very much start with the design stage first of all. So having identified who, where, what and when, we really start looking at designing a program that is going to be fit for purpose and we identify who you're going to be putting onto that program, which qualification they will be going on to, and start working out what sort of cohort size is, taking into account the geographical locations, taking into account any mandatory or statutory training or any bespoke training that you want weaving into the apprenticeship as well. And we may even bring in some subject matter experts into that design, but very much the design element is the first phase of being able to identify where to get started. And once we've identified the design, we then move into the development stage, and that's really where we start moving things forward so that we can start putting a development plan to introduce this into your organisation, working in partnership with you as the employer to ensure that we meet the right sort of deadlines, we encourage the right sorts of people, right all the way through into implementation, so ensuring that you have a design, a development, and implementation phase. And then once you've gone into implementation, how do you then analyse that what you did was right and it is having a positive impact on the business, or not, as the case may be, and maybe that's an opportunity to pause, stop, reflect, and maybe learn from maybe some of the design elements or perhaps some of the sessions that you may have put on. So this is a system that goes round and round and round. So even if you start a program, it doesn't start with design and end with an analysis. This is something that is a continuously developing circle all the way through the program, particularly where you've got a number of people in a cohort. So the next thing that we like to think about when we are designing or developing programs with our employees is looking at how we can tailor that content or contextualize the delivery. And not all employers need this, but this tends to be something that employers want where there are a number of employees within the organisation that have a vested interest or want to be developed, where actually we can look at how we actually make a program that is fit for your organisation and is fit for the sector as well. So it's really an opportunity to build a bespoke, fit for purpose, contextualised and unique training program within the Apprenticeship Standards. And it really puts the core elements of what you want out of that program at the heart of the design. And it virtually starts on a needs analysis. And we would work out exactly where we need to be, what we need to deliver and how we need to get there. So the foundations of this are understanding the apprenticeship standards in the first place. So which are the right qualifications for your company, your employees, and there are many, many standards. So identifying the right one is really, really important. Some of our employers have actually identified programs of delivery that they thought were absolutely suitable for them, but actually on further investigation, actually they couldn't fully complete those programs. There were certain elements of that particular person's job role that would make it very difficult for them to achieve. So understanding the right apprenticeship standard, first of all, understanding the EPA criteria and those sorts of requirements. So starting with sort of the foundation at level one there is a really important part. And then we look at your values and your culture, your vision and your language. This is the part where the apprenticeship program that you want to start on really starts to be molded and shaped into something that's fit for your organisation. This is where we use your language, and we may even weave into this mandatory or statutory training, or perhaps some areas of the program that you want to focus in on. We might look at the values of your organisation, and we might look and see how those values can be weaved into the apprenticeship program. So at the end of the program, it absolutely feels like an apprenticeship from your organisation, not an apprenticeship that they've studied that is relatively generic. But how do we weave into that the culture and the vision and the plans for the organisation moving forward? And a lot of this can be captured, particularly for new recruits, in the induction phase as well. So we look at the induction phases and we start to build all those together into a programme that actually is reflective of not just your sector, but of your specific business. And then the final stage really is to look at how we actually deliver these programmes and what are the essentially your organisation, your employees are able to commit to. And that may be in the form of face-to-face classes, team building, maybe various different discussions, or maybe even looking at various different one-to-one tutorials. So we really need to look at how we work with you to make sure that you get the desired outcomes from a programme that can be contextualised with tailored content from you. And the tailored content and contextualised delivery can really be dialed up or really dialed right down. You have a really good baseline with the standards, and you can really give each of these standards your own specific flavour that really works for you. So in terms of the tailored content, what we've done here is we've actually given you an example of a management qualification purely because it's a generic qualification that most of the people on the webinar hopefully may have a requirement for, or may in the past have had a requirement for. So you can start to understand what the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours are, and how you may be able to tailor that content to meet your specific needs. And if you look at the knowledge section there may be a particular element in your business, and this may have come out in the step 1 or step 2, as to how we identify who, where and what to start with, where you may identify a skill gap within your organisation may actually be about poor leadership within your organisation, or perhaps project management, or perhaps you may want to major on a specific element of finance within your organisation. So how do you work with the training provider to understand that these are some of the skills areas or the knowledge areas that we're really looking to kind of dial up a little bit more, so that we have a bit more understanding and we increase our knowledge within those specific areas. You may have already covered some of the other areas with your own training, with managing people or building relationships, or perhaps even communication. So working with the right training provider, you may decide to go down a generic route, or you may actually decide to actually look at some of those individual knowledge areas and focusing on some of those more than others. And then looking at the skills element as well. What are the skills that you want these people to come out with at the end of this program? These are really important elements before you get started. You know, it may well be, if you're in an organization where you need to make strong decision making, or you perhaps need to build strong relationships with your supply chain or your customers, which might lead to growing your business or bringing in more contracts. And how do you lead people from the front? So what do you want from a skills perspective from your people? And then the final one really is what sort of behaviours are you looking for your team or your new recruits or your existing talent to come out with? Do they take the right sort of responsibility? Do they air that right level of professionalism? Are they inclusive? Are they agile? Are they flexible? And are they an ambassador for your organisation? So what are the behaviours that you would like them to come out with or improve upon already? And in some of these instances, we've just put at the bottom there, we have a number of employers who've actually asked us if we can actually include some additional training on top of the apprenticeship standards. And some examples at the bottom there, we have a number of organisations in the transport sector who are looking at CPC or licence acquisition. How do we add those on top of the apprenticeship at an additional cost? And how do we weave those qualifications into the standards already, rather than feeling like they're bolted onto the side or along the process? We have another customer who's specifically interested in NLP, and we've actually mapped the NLP against the actual standard itself, so that we're covering part of NLP within some of the actual knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard, and there'll have to be a separate element or test at the end of that. But that was something that particular employee wanted, and we've been able to actually build that and tailor that programme for that particular employer. Now we get to the 20% off the job, as they call it. And I think the 20% off the job has probably been one of the most difficult transitions for a lot of people, or particularly people who are levy-paying employers, understanding what the commitment from 20% actually means. I guess the way that I view 20% is actually it's 20% at the desk is probably a better term, as opposed to 20% off the job. because you're not really losing these people. They're still in your organisation. They just need to be able to demonstrate that 20% of the work that they are doing is off the job. So that could be at the desk. And we've put together what we believe is a really strong way of working, and it's something that is actually starting to become embedded within all our organisations, and that's the 70-20-10 rule. And some of you may have heard of this, and actually it doesn't have to be exactly 70-20-10, but of course 70-20-10 is a good rule of thumb. So 70% of that 20% at the desk or off the job can be workplace learning. It can be based on job rotations, working with other people within the organisation, or maybe short secondments into other parts of somebody else's role, or perhaps working on a specific project that might be important to the business, but they wouldn't normally be involved with, or perhaps giving them additional responsibilities or decision-making authority that allows them to think on their feet, or perhaps how they might job shadow somebody who's been in the business for a longer period of time, or perhaps who's been at a different level. But 70% experiential learning is a good indication of going towards that 20% at the desk or off the job. And the next element of the 70-20-10 is 20% learning and development. So this is about how you can actually work with your coaches and your mentors or your managers, or perhaps working with other people who are observing you in your role. So an important part of the 20% is your one-to-one coaching, and how you work with your manager or your peers to have 360 reviews. It may well be that you're attending networking or professional events and seminars where you're actually learning a new skill or being exposed to new environments that you've never been exposed to before. And then the 10% formal learning is really where we get into part of the delivery, really, which is the classroom, whether we look at classroom delivery or whether we look at the individual modules. And Pivot modules. Pivot is actually an LMS system. It's a City and Guilds LMS that Seetec uses. It's very, very modern, it's a great system to use. It's got access to lots of different resources in there. But how do you access those modules? So what's the learning that can take place on that platform, and how do we record the work that you've done on that system? And how does the LMS record all of the resources that you're actually engaging, reading through, and the work that you're doing online, as well as internal, external courses? But don't forget, reading and research that you conduct also forms part of that 10% of formal learning. So 20% off the job, or 20% of that at the desk, can be made up of that 70-20-10. And it may be more of the experiential learning, it may be less of the learning and development, and it may be more of the formal learning. But that is something that you should discuss with your training provider to make sure you're getting the right balance at the right time. So how do you bring all of this together, and how do you make this work so that you can get into a position where it works for you? Well, we talked about step one, step one was really identifying what, where, and who. And that's really the process of the exploration meeting. This is the consultative approach that you need to go through with your training provider. This is where we identify what, how, and when, who we're going to be targeting, why we're starting these sorts of areas. It's really, really important, because this is the foundation of how we will move on to step two, which is really that development session, that development stages, where now we've identified the programs, we now need to identify how do we contextualize it, if we need to contextualize it, and what subject matter experts do we need to bring in, maybe from your organization, from our organization, so that you get a truly contextualized program that is really fit for purpose. And once we've gone through that exploratory, we've gone through the development session, we now know what it is and to who, and we now know what the programs are going to look like. We may even know when we're going to start. But it's really important that before we start anything, that we take part in what we would call the information sessions or the colleague briefings. Now, this is a really, really important element of the process, because it's important that any learner that is going on to a program, firstly, they know what program they're going on to. Secondly, they understand what the program will entail, the commitments from them as an individual, But more importantly as well, it's important for the individual to know that they are being supported by their manager. So what Seetec do is we do information sessions on the programme with prospective learners. We also do information sessions with managers. So they understand what the individual will be learning, what level of support they will need, and we try to get the managers on board so they are supportive of them. And we often find in some circumstances that some of those managers may go on to a management qualification and actually supporting an apprentice who may be going through a business admin or a customer service or some other qualification. And actually, that's a really good way of getting somebody to support another learner or apprentice because they're going through it themselves. Once we've done those information sessions and colleague briefings and everybody know what the programmes entails and the commitment levels, and after all, this is your money, this is your levy that you're investing in, or it may even be co-investment that you're looking to do. Once everybody knows what the level of commitment is, then we really need to get into the induction, and that's the point where we would start to bring people together to induct them into that programme of study. Now, that induction may well be with the trainer or with what we would call an ADC, which is an apprenticeship development coach. And the apprenticeship development coach will be the person who will support you through the length of the qualification and the apprenticeship, all the way through till we have a really clear launch. And that launch may actually be something that we do formally within your organisation. We have an employer that's just in a formal launch and they did an announcement on their intranet. They got all of their new apprentices or their cohorts of apprentices to formulate in one room, and they did a formal induction, balloons, celebration. They're starting their journey of development. Some organisations don't go to that length, but it's about launching the programme within your organisation because you know you've gone through the right process, the right steps to get the right people onto the right programmes. So then the final step really is measure and reporting. Now this is a really important part. It's okay to get started. It's okay to identify who. It's okay to get them onto the programme. But how are these people getting on? So one of the things you should be looking for from a training provider is getting access to regular reporting on the progress of your individual employees, the challenges that some of those are facing, and how they're actually getting on with the program that's being designed. And it may well be that you take stock of the particular program and you may decide to make some changes working with the training provider. Maybe there's too many classroom sessions, or maybe there's not enough. Maybe you want to focus on more experiential learning, or perhaps you want to make the cohorts larger or for the next one. But actually the reporting element from your training provider is a really important part because it tells you where your learners are and what you may need to change for future programs. But then a really interesting part of it is what impact of this training is it having on your staff? Is there an increase in sales? Is there an increase on return on investment? Do you find that people are putting what they've learned into practice? Are they becoming more efficient and more effective in their job roles? Are they communicating with your supply chain or their customers more efficiently, or perhaps even across departmentals? Maybe you have individual silos within your organisations and you're trying to break down those silos, and actually a communication element of one of the apprenticeship programmes will actually start to break down those barriers so you're a bit more engaging. What's the measured impact of that training on your staff and in your business? And how do you analyse the changes that it's having within the organisation? What do you need the apprenticeships to deliver for you? So taking into account the reporting, the impact and the analysis are really important measurements. And you should take time to discuss that with your training provider, your individual learners, and also the people that are supporting the learners on the programme, the coaches and the trainers as well. And it's a really good time to reflect on the programme that you've invested in and perhaps how you make that programme better for perhaps the next round. So we wanted to just go through an example. It's always good to give you an example of an organisation who's probably gone through a number of challenges. And we've picked this particular one because Diligenta is an organisation. They are a professional services business process outsource business. They work in the financial services sector, supporting banks. They work B2B, B2C. This is a growing organisation with a number of different sites across the UK and across devolved nations. And Diligenta have gone through every stage of and all the steps that we've gone through today, and some breaks in all of those processes as well over a 24-month period. And one thing that Diligenta did know is that they knew they wanted to absolutely utilise the levy. They didn't know how to do that. They didn't know where to start. They just knew that they were paying a levy and it was an opportunity. And it was definitely an opportunity, and it was not a tax. So when we first started working with Diligenta, we identified some key objectives within the organisation as part of that, exploratory meeting, that consultancy piece. Effectively, that's step one that we talked about earlier, and that is they wanted to identify how they drive higher standards of work-based competence, not just within different parts of their business, but across all of their different sites as well. They wanted to ensure everybody was working towards a higher standard. Higher standards meant that they had better customer feedback, and better customer feedback meant that they were winning new contracts with new customers. But they also wanted to improve the consistency of those working practices. They had previously seen that some sites were more effective than others, and perhaps some managers or team leaders were more experienced than others as well, and that could be quite evidently seen. They also knew that they wanted to create a very clear career pathway or progression route for some of their more talented individuals, and this was something that they'd really struggled to articulate to their staff in previous communications. They may have put things on the intranet, but it didn't really have this sort of desired effect. So actually looking at those progression routes and being able to show how somebody who may be a new recruit or an existing person within the organisation can actually progress into a more senior role, and making that nice and clear. And then the final thing that they wanted to do was, and this is something that they've been wanting to do for years, they've tried on several occasions and failed, was they wanted to develop their first Diligenta graduate programme. And the graduate programme that they actually wanted to put in place was a programme where they wanted to bring in 15 to 20 graduates, particularly across this sort of Liverpool northwest region. And they wanted to recruit these people, and they wanted to expose them to different parts of the business, and they wanted to really embark them on a fantastic graduate programme. And these are all of the things that they wanted to do. And with our support, we were able to support them with their first graduate programme. And in fact, with Diligenta, Seetec in this particular instance actually did the recruitment for all of their graduates, which they previously struggled to attract, and they had some fantastic candidates. They were oversubscribed actually for the programme. But again, in terms of your needs, how do you recruit the right people into your business? So graduate recruitment is a really good way of actually spending your levy, and it certainly has worked for Diligenta. So we also knew that Diligenta had identified 4 key areas where they wanted to invest their levy first of all. Some of our employers want to identify all of the needs across the whole of the organisation. They start with a huge piece of paper and identify 15 to 20 types of qualifications. They get a perfectly formed plan, and then they start getting started with some of those qualifications. And in some instances that works really well, in some instances it doesn't. Within Diligenta, they wanted to concentrate on 4 key areas, and they wanted to roll out to a number of other areas once it started in this particular area. So the 4 key areas were leadership and management at levels 3 and level 5, level 3 being how they develop their future leaders, and level 5 being how they upskill their existing senior managers, as well as IT, project management, and then also their customer service. And as part of the level 3 and level 5 management programme that we've delivered for them, they've had a number of cohorts across the whole of the UK, a number of geographical areas actually. And they wanted to identify, what is the business impact? Does this achieve the business objective? One of the things that they identified was, How effective are we, and how do we attract new business or new talent into the organisation? So they really wanted to identify how do they progress their people and what the impact of putting these people onto these level 3 and level 5 programs. So when we went back to them, we asked them, what impact has the management program had on your business? And these are the results that they've came back with. They came back with 40% of the colleagues who are still on the programs now have already been promoted because of their attitude, identifying the right sorts of people, putting together a program that was right for their organisation and right for the individuals, has meant that 40% of their colleagues have already been promoted. And that's really encouraged them to start looking at other cohorts and other pathways for their managers. And these are people that were identified talent, and they've really enjoyed the apprenticeship program. But more importantly, they're actually putting a lot of what they're learning into practice, and it's really given them the opportunity to progress those people, and 40% have been promoted. And then the remaining 60% have actually shown significant improvements, and most of those have taken on additional responsibilities. In other words, they've not just been given those additional responsibilities as part of the apprenticeship program, they've actually taken on additional responsibilities because they've been able to apply what they've been learning into their work, and that's given Diligenta the confidence to actually give them additional responsibilities, which will no doubt lead to future talent development. But what does this really mean for them as a business? Well, really allows them to future-proof the leaders of the future. And it means that they've now got a succession plan in place, which means they can develop all of their talent, they continue to progress individuals, and they can attract new people into the organisation from the beginning as well. So not only are they able to attract new people into the organisation and offer them training, development and progression pathways, they're able to train those people as they move up the career ladder as well. A really good example of good CPD pathways that have been really created well within the organisation. And this is something that they hadn't got prior to the levy. This is something that they always wanted to do, and the levy has really been the vehicle that's allowed them to do that. And of course, one of the biggest achievements for Diligenta is the launch of their first ever graduate scheme. And that has gone really, really well. Very strong graduates, and all of those graduates still on programme, and they will become the future leaders of the organisation. And they're actually looking at how they look at bringing in their next graduate programme already. So it's a really good opportunity to think of an organisation that's probably gone through every single challenge that's physically possible within an employer, that's understanding the levy, looking how to utilise it, and has gone through the right steps to end up in the right sort of place. So that's brought us to the end of the webinar. I hope you've been able to take something away from the webinar today in terms of the process that we go through, the steps that you as an employer and the training provider that you work with should go through, and how you can really start to identify the right people, going on to the right sorts of programs, and actually how you can measure the real impact that it's having on your business, and does it meet your business objectives, and how you actually sustain this, not just this year and utilising your levy, and how you utilise it for future years to come as well. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask those questions now. For any questions that you want to ask, we may come back to you on. Please also remember that we will also send you a copy of this recording. I've just got a couple of questions here, actually. One of the questions that I've got is, I'm struggling to find apprenticeship standards that meet our requirements. Are there other forms of training I can use the levy for? That's a really interesting question, actually. We get asked this a lot. At the moment, the answer's no. You can only use your levy for apprenticeships, and you can only use them on apprenticeship standards and frameworks at the moment. But that doesn't mean that you can't find a program that's right for your business or right for your organisation. So there's many apprenticeship standards that are being developed all the time. But actually, your apprenticeship levy is actually used for apprenticeships. So here we have a question. How does the graduate programme work in terms of their starting salary? How does the graduate program work in terms of their starting salary? Well, of course, if you're taking a graduate on, there are minimum pay, hourly rates that you need to pay your employees. But of course, if you're bringing them in as a graduate, you can progress them onto, put them onto an apprenticeship. So what you pay them, as long as it's in line with the minimum apprenticeship wage, if you're bringing them in as an apprentice, then you can bring them in as an apprenticeship wage. And once they've completed their apprenticeship, then you can move them on to a wage that's agreed within your organisation. So the graduate programme within Diligenta was an advertised role on a specific graduate wage where they were actually brought in onto an apprenticeship as a graduate. I'm not sure if that answers your question, probably needed a bit more detail there. We've got another question here, which is, we're not spending our full levy allocation at the moment. Will we lose all our unspent funds now we've reached the 24-month deadline? Actually, this is a really interesting one. Actually, I was with an employer last week that said, we have, I think it was £100,000 that's unspent. Will we now lose that £100,000? And the answer is no. You will only lose the first monthly payment from 2017. And for every subsequent month that you don't spend your levy, you will lose a month's levy. So you don't lose all of it in one go. You will lose each monthly payment. So you as levy paying employers will pay a levy every month. You have 24 months to spend that levy. So we have a question that's come here. For example, our company hires full-time Part 1 architects on a set specific salary. If we were to take on the Part 1 architects and apprentices instead, can we reduce the salary by 20%? I think we may need to take that one offline because we may need a bit more information on that particular one. The rule of thumb is if you are bringing in a new recruit and you're putting them onto an apprenticeship and they are on an apprenticeship contract with you, you need to pay them an apprenticeship wage. We have another question here, which is, we'd like to deliver customer service levels 2 and 3 to key staff in the business, but when we've reached out to the organisation, there doesn't seem to be much interest at the moment. What can we do to improve engagement rates? Again, this is a really interesting one, actually. This comes back to how you go out to market, how you go out to engage your employees. If you stick the qualifications or the opportunity for progression or development onto an intranet, you're effectively saying, here is something that you can apply for. We found the best use of an employer's time is to really put information sessions together to invite people who are interested in progression and development, but also to look at your existing talent development plans. And you may want to tie those into mid-year or end-of-year reviews. So actually, how do you identify the people that you want to actually develop first and foremost? And the reason this is important is because if you're looking to get a cohort or a number of your people onto individual apprenticeships, you want to make sure that they become the ambassadors and the advocates of that program for future apprentices, rather than it being a first come, first served basis. It's really important that you get the right people onto the right program, because if you get the wrong people onto the wrong program, then actually the level of take up there afterwards may be poor, because it may not be something that people particularly shout about in a favourable way. It's really important that you bring the right people on who become the ambassadors. And actually, if you link it into your talent development program like Diligenta have done, it's something that is aspirational to go on to, in the fact that some of the your existing staff may actually seek to be invited or included or to get onto an apprenticeship program. So it may be aspirational for some of your employees to actually go onto a program of study, as opposed to everybody's welcome to go onto a particular program as and when. If you want to link this back to return on investment, if you want to link this back to impact your business and meeting your objectives, it is worth taking the time to work with your training provider to go through the right steps, identify the right people, identify the right qualifications, and link that into your business objectives, and then go out to identify when you want to start that program. And if you start to lose some money out of your levy pot, that's okay. Work with the training provider to put a plan in place. What we do at Seetec is we have a profiling tool that allows us to work out how much you're paying per your levy for each month, and we would program in, hypothetically, if you had 5 people on a particular program, 10 on another, 2 in another area, what that would actually look like in terms of utilising and spending your levy. So you can actually see a full roadmap of how your levy can be spent effectively by actually starting programs of study, and how you can actually fully utilise your levy each month, as opposed to just starting and hoping that you spend it and hoping that there's no clawback. It needs to be a little bit more strategic, but your training provider should be able to help profile that out with you to give you the right sort of support so you really spend your levy and utilise it effectively. So we haven't got any more questions for now. We've got a few questions that we've taken away. We will send everybody a copy of the recording. Thank you for everybody who's attended today, and we hope to speak to you soon. Bye for now.